From Masvidal clocking Ben Askren with the fastest KO in UFC history to Adesanya finally settling the score with Alex Pereira, here are UFC's most memorable moments. And let's kick off the list with a high-flying knee. Talk about going from 0 to 100. Gamebred completely changed the game with the fastest KO in UFC history. I want to take you back to UFC 239, where the man, the myth, the legend, Ben Askren became, and I quote, stiff as a board. Everyone remembers the iconic moment where Jon Anik couldn't even finish announcing a word from the sponsors. Jorge Masvidal quite literally ran through the American grappler, catching him like a deer in the headlights. The crowd was wild, Joe Rogan was screaming, and Masvidal was already posing for the camera, letting the world know that he has arrived. It may have seemed like a fluke win considering how easily he caught Askren. But on the Joe Rogan podcast, Gamebred broke it all down for us. What if you found out that the flying knee was all planned out weeks before? Before the fight, Askren was pretty vocal with the trash talking. On Ariel Helwani's MMA show, he confidently claimed that the welterweight couldn't bear handling him for 15 minutes. Yeah, that really aged like milk. Masvidal, on the other hand, knew that behind all those staged dialogues and tweets, Ben was nothing more than a dork and a nerd. He noticed Askren would freeze up when confronted face-to-face, essentially whenever he went off script. Jorge caught on to this and exploited this trait of his in the octagon. If you notice closely, Masvidal was calmly doing his usual I might have a knife behind my back walk toward Askren. But then, he went off script and began sprinting toward him. Askren had nowhere to go and ducked right into the knee. Joe Rogan dubbed it as one of the greatest KOs of all time, and rightfully so. And speaking of going 0 to 100, how about the time Khabib launched himself into the McGregor camp? For this, we're dialing back to the most bought pay-per-view of all time, UFC 229. This was the night the T-Mobile Arena turned into a coliseum. It's an understatement to say that there was bad blood between McGregor and Conor. It all started when Khabib had an altercation with Conor's boy, Artem Lobov. McGregor is loading his entourage over only to crash Khabib's team bus with a trolley. The press conferences were dark, with McGregor calling Khabib a rat and his manager a terrorist. But Khabib remained calm throughout, which led to the iconic "I'm gonna smash your boy" speech, and boy did he smash Conor that night. After mauling the notorious one for 4 rounds, he caught him in a vicious vice. Conor was done talking, but oh boy, was Khabib just getting started. He threw his mouthpiece at the McGregor camp, who were talking smack from the corner through the fight. And that's when the eagle decided to soar into them, literally. A full-fledged brawl ensued. Security got involved, and so did Khabib's camp inside the octagon, attacking a battered and bruised McGregor. Matters got so bad that Khabib wasn't even handed the belt, only because there was a chance the crowd would throw things at him. Brendan Schaub vented how the biggest night in UFC history was damaged. If only this fight skyrocketed the UFC's popularity tenfold. The only thing that was damaged, however, was Conor's mojo. Now, from one of the most heated rivalries, let's head to the coldest stare down the UFC has ever seen. Here is a fight that pretty much sums up what the UFC is all about. In 2015, UFC 189, legend Robbie Lawler was set to take on Rory MacDonald. The two had met before in a fight where Robbie won via a split decision. But neither fighter was heading into the fight with the mindset of going the distance. Rory looked sharp from the get-go, striking first with a barrage of killer jabs while Lawler waited patiently. After the second round, all hell broke loose. Lawler, with an accurate left-hand jab, smashed Rory MacDonald's nose, and after drawing the first blood, the Ruthless kept on coming, while Aries kept marching on, wiping the blood away whenever he could. The slugfest continued on for the rest of the fight, which turned into a bloodbath for Rory. And just when the Canadian looked like he was slowing down, he clapped back with brutal combinations, bloodying Lawler. And at the end of round 4, the world witnessed one of the most iconic stare-downs in UFC history. 2 fighters, battered and bruised, but still letting each other know that they're still here. Even though Rory lost via TKO, fans applauded his determination and grit, but it did come at a price. He posted an X-ray of his nose on Instagram, which featured a lot of black lines that shouldn't be there. Dana White revealed Rory didn't even know what year it was after the fight. Each fighter left a piece of themselves in the octagon that night, in a fight that will definitely be a valuable piece of history for the promotion. But was it more historic than Israel Adesanya versus Anderson Silva? UFC 234 wasn't just a pay-per-view, it was a night where the torch was passed from one legend to another on the come-up. It was like a scene out of an anime, something Izzy calls himself a proud fan of. The student was about to take on the master, and just like any great anime fight, this one was delivered. The fight had everything: high-flying kicks, counters, and the famous Naruto moment that will live on forever. During the fight, Izzy tried to catch Spider with a smooth head kick, which he ducked within a fraction of a second. Right then, Israel struck the famous Rock Lee post from the anime when he was fighting against Gara of the Sand. Anderson tried to keep up with Izzy's agility, but it was evident the sun was setting on one of the greatest fighters ever to grace the octagon. In the end, Israel won the fight via unanimous decision, and as he went on to embrace Silva, he was greeted with the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu bow down as a sign of respect. Israel reciprocated and was in tears. That's enough to make a grown man cry. Rory and Lawler's fight was something out of a movie, but our boy Buckley here was basically playing Street Fighter with this one. Here's the knockout that immortalized middleweight Joaquin Buckley in the UFC history books. On October 10th, fight night, Impa Kasanganay took on the Missourian in what looked like a pretty regular fight in the first round. But no one could have believed what went down in the next. As Buckley tried a kick to the midsection, Impa grabbed his foot to the counter. And that's when Buckley decided to go Bruce Lee and deliver one of the most cleanly executed head kicks of all time. The world went mental over it. Heck, Kanye West, of all people, wrote a literal rap track about it. And you know what's crazier? Buckley didn't even think it was a big deal until he watched the replays. He'd noticed Impa catching his leg twice in the first round. Well, you know what they say. Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, you get the picture. Joaquin was handed over the 50G performance bonus, but his KO that night will forever be priceless. Buckley's performance was memorable that night, but it wasn't nearly as memorable as the night the Predator became the prey. Here's a fight that needs no introduction. Israel Adesanya versus Alex Pereira. 2 or 3 if you will, who cares? Because apparently Adesanya doesn't keep scores, he settles them. Poitin Alex Pereira loomed over Izzy like a curse for years. After losing to him twice back in glory, the Poitin followed him to the UFC, where he stole the middleweight championship from him at UFC 281. Ever since the loss, we saw a different Adesanya. He wanted vengeance. And at UFC 287, heading in as the underdog, he unleashed the beast in him. From the get-go, Pereira went straight for the kill, as expected, and when Izzy had his back against the cage eating cinder block from the Brazilian, it looked as if the clock was winding down. Every Adesanya fan had their eyes closed, thinking they'd seen this before. But out of nowhere, Adesanya unleashed the perfect right hand at the temple, followed by a hammer punch to finish him. While the crowd was losing their minds, Israel reached for his back, where he had kept the arrows signifying Poitin's demise. 1, 2, 3, the score was finally settled. Chael Sonnen calls it one of the biggest moments of our generation. Surely that celebration will be passed on to generations. And as Izzy prayed that everyone experiences that level of happiness just once in their lives, you know, one man would have been watching with a smile. The student had indeed become the master. So, from Adesanya finally settling the score with Alex Pereira, to Masvidal clocking Ben Askren with the fastest KO in UFC history, those were the UFC's most memorable moments.